Hi, my name is Jonna and I play football for Chelsea FC and for the Swedish national team. And you are listening to the Blue Day podcast.
Welcome back, my friends, to the podcast that will never end. We're so glad that you could attend. Come inside, come inside. Yes, this is the Blue Day podcast, and for Chelsea fans everywhere across the world, every day is a blue day. I am your host, the creator, the man with a face for podcasting, Keith Lawrence, and this is a really special episode, ladies and gentlemen, as it is the podcast birthday. That's right, 8th of September is the podcast birthday, and we are having a reunion show to mark the occasion. So therefore, to join me today on this truly special episode, it's great to have him back. He's your friend and mine. For me, he will always be the ticket guy. It's Warren. Warren, how are we, sir?
I'm very good, thank you, Keith. It always was a pleasure doing the podcast with you, and it is, of course, a fantastic pleasure to be back to mark our 1 year anniversary, something that myself and you in the months leading up to our first ever podcast that we broadcast on the 8th of September last year. It's something that we spoke about, how are we going to look back on the first year and what would we have achieved, and would we have got to where we wanted to? Would we have got further? Would the podcast still be going? Would we still be friends? That was debatable. It still is. But no, absolutely. It's wonderful to be here. I'm very much looking forward to it. Obviously, we've spent a number of weeks discussing it now and, building up to it. And it's great to be back on the podcast. Obviously, I've taken a step behind the scenes now. I kind of assist Keith in any way that I can with the PR behind the scenes with social media and stuff, which I'm sure you all know by now anyway. But yeah, it's great to be back here. It's great to be back on my laptop with my mic and my headset set up, feeling all like a DJ all over again. All I need now is some spinning decks and a bit of reggae, and we'll be good to go.
For those that are not aware, Warren was the first co-host of the podcast back in from September to December, and we was recording every Sunday morning, and we had fun. It was just
come rain, shine or hangover, we was there.
Yes, and it was an hour and a half, or maybe just an hour of just talking about Chelsea at the time, because it was during the lockdown. No fans can attend football matches, so it was better for us because all the games are on telly. We used to give detailed analysis, and it got to a stage where, as we grew, because when we first started this podcast, we were greener than a pepper tree. I think it's safe to say. We then eventually grew. We started doing watch-alongs, which is on our YouTube channel, the early watch-alongs, which got quite a lot of views, didn't it? It got a lot of views.
Do you know what? It was one of the things that, obviously, we wanted the podcast to grow, and we discussed the best way to sort of get our name and our brand, so to speak, out there. And one of them was the watch-alongs, because we noticed that they was very popular amongst people who wanted to view it, and they're the kind of viewers that we wanted to bring in because they interacted in the chat a lot. So there was like a motive behind me doing it, but I just had so much fun doing those. I mean, some of the results weren't great. I mean, I remember doing a watch along for the Arsenal game that sparked their run that probably prevented their relegation. Was it Boxing Day? Three?
It was, I'm afraid, yeah, Boxing Day, yeah.
So there was some watch-alongs that weren't so great, but I remember one in particular, away to, I believe it was Rennes in the Champions League, and it was early on in the group stage, and we had gone 1-0 up. Hudson-Odoi had scored. Mason Mount had found him with a beautiful pass, and then Rennes equalised quite late on. I think 80 plus.
It was like the 82nd, if I'm being quite specific, 82nd minute they equalised, yeah.
And this was during the time that everyone still thought that Werner was going to kick on and have a great season. And I had been questioning Werner for quite a long time by this point, saying that he missed a lot of chances. And I believe that my exact expressions was he's a sloppy cunt. And I remember Werner going through on goal, and obviously Giroud got the winner, and I went absolutely divvy. I'm sort of like, I'm known amongst my friends for my rather over the top and over emotional celebrations. So yeah, part of the podcast that, especially in, like you said, Keith, and there's only a month from the August of December, I had so much fun doing it. And I hope that the viewers had a lot of fun watching it as well. I mean, we did have quite a few comments saying, yeah, that's the kind of reaction that I have and nobody else seems to have, sort of thing. So I think people connected with it, but it was great fun. I managed to I done a couple of little live reactions during the Euros as well. I got Harry Kane's penalty against Denmark in the semis. That was quite a dramatic reaction. So yeah, it has been amazing fun. And yeah, just going back to like the first year, it's just, obviously we're going to discuss the first year now, but yeah, it's an incredible achievement to have achieved what we and you have achieved in the last 12 months. It's something that in reality, I suppose we expected to achieve in time, but not such a short amount of time. And I don't mean being massively successful. I don't mean we've moved into mansions and we're famous enough that we can offer Floyd Mayweather out and get paid 150 million for it. I'm not saying we've quite hit the heights yet, but to achieve what we've achieved on a personal level, and to have interviewed some of the amazing guests that we've had the opportunity to interview, that we're going to obviously run through throughout this reunion show, has been dreams come true. And it's not to, and at least he's got a good ringtone if it's going to interrupt, ladies and gentlemen.
Terribly sorry about that. Thank you.
It's You'll Never Walk Alone. Right, so good. That's a good, ladies and gentlemen. If I've got anything to do about it, that was actually spot on. But no, yeah, it's not too much to say, Keith, is it, that it's been a dream come true over the last 12 months. And it's thing that, like I say, we haven't reached the heights, we haven't reached everyone we wanted to reach yet, but it's been amazing. It's
been a whirlwind year, because when I first started, and again we spoke about it a lot before we started recording, was, what are we going to do? Where are we going to go? How are we going to do it? And we had a little bit of a plan whereby it was just going to be like the first year, just review, rant, and just have fun, basically, wasn't it? You know, we did sort of take the piss out of a few people along the way.
Andy Townsend, Chris Sutton, Gustavo Poyet. What? I didn't say anything.
Leave them alone.
There's interference on this line.
Leave them alone. Goodness me. They are...
They're in the football league. They're in the football league now as well. I'll be sat there perfectly happy, having a perfectly lovely day, and Sutton United will score, which is a good thing because I'm from the London Borough of Sutton. But I just hear Sutton and go Sutton.
For those again that have sort of decided to like us and listen to us only sort of for a short period a couple of months ago, my esteemed colleague here is not a fan of Mr. Chris Sutton, not a fan of Gustavo Poyet, and not a fan of Andy Townsend. And we was having a lot of jokes on air about Chris Sutton, and we did sort of have a little bit of a what if moment in regards to if we were to have Mr. Sutton eventually on the podcast. And it was just a case whereby for you, Warren, it was I ain't fucking doing that.
Well, no, two things. Number one, it may have been a joke to you. It was never a joke to me. Number two, I do believe the exact conversation that we had, both on air and behind the scenes, actually, because it was at one point, out of all the fantastic and wonderful people that yourself and myself have had opportunity to interview over the last 12 months, Chris Sutton was one of those people that would have been pretty high on the list and was in a certain amount of demand. So we did actually have to have a semi-professional conversation that consisted of, well, Keith, it's up to you whether you let me on the show. If you let me on the show, I'm going to tell him exactly what I fucking think about him. So I think there was an executive decision from above that if ever we was to interview Chris Sutton, I'd be out that day. I'd be having technical issues. But we did have a lot of laughs. We had a lot of rants. I believe that we provided a lot of pretty insightful, detailed analysis of games as well, reviews and previews. I think that a lot of stuff that we called came true. I remember talking about my watch-alongs. I got 3 or 4 scorelines correct consecutively. You know, I announced them before the match what I thought the score was going to be, and again, it's just, well, I tell you what, Keith, why don't we, for the benefit of those that have been around for the 12 months and for the benefit of those that are the more recent viewers and have found us a bit more recently, why don't we go back to the very beginning? Why don't you open it up for us and go back to the very beginning? Our first show, previewing the season, previewing no fans, previewing all the signings that we had made, how excited we were for Frank, how excited we were for the academy.
Oh, God. Well, it was around this time where we did sign Kai Havertz as well, which was a player that I was very high on and still am. And seeing him mature within 12 months has been quite staggering, basically.
Scored the winning goal in the Champions League final. So he didn't have a bad one.
Didn't have a bad season. You know, we brought in Timo Werner, but he has been hit and miss. He has divided a lot of opinion amongst Chelsea supporters. But as you say, when we started this podcast, the world was completely different to what it is now. And that does sound a little bit weird when you still talk about it in a COVID environment. But if you look at it whereby there was no fans attending stadiums, Sky was putting their prices up and sort of charging fans
£15 a match.
£15 to watch their team play on top of their monthly subscription, which we did cover on an episode, didn't we? We actually covered on a full length episode, which got quite a lot of feedback from listeners. And
minded listeners, we found we had a really positive response to that, didn't we? Because
and
here at the podcast, we totally understand that we're going to say a lot of things that are controversial and people are going to disagree with, and we're very open to feedback, whether it is, you know, positive and negative, it agrees with us or not. But in that particular episode, we found that, I mean, for those of you, we'll have to dig it out and put it in the link for this video, Keith, for that particular episode, because that was a big thing at the time. It's very easily forgotten about things like that, but it was a big thing at the time.
Well, it's funny we should talk about it now. Obviously, with everything that's gone on since, the likes of the Super League bollocks, as well as
my ringtone's not yours.
Your ringtone's definitely not mine. No, it's funny when you look at it on the way back. You see about Sky putting their prices up. Premier League clubs talking about Super League. It's all money, money, money. And a lot of that's gone under the radar now, but it was great for us because we covered both sides of it. You know, at the time when the Super League was coming out, obviously we'll talk about, you know, different guest hosts that the podcast has had since, but myself and at the time the podcast covered it, and there was talk about obviously what was going on. We was covering it, and then even with the £15 a month, we covered it, and the feedback was great. But then also
a match,
£15 a match. Sorry, not £15 a month.
That was part of the discussion that we had. That if it was £15 a month, and you was going to get an extra 8 games or something, all right, well. But again, you should go back and give that a listen, because it'd be interesting to listen to that. And see the differences or any changes that have been made, or how much it's been swept under the rug, or how valid the points that we were making at the time actually were. Sort of looking back on it, it'd be interesting to see that back sort of 12 months on. Nearly.
But as you say, when the first couple of episodes, we was very, say, inexperienced would probably be the nicest way of putting it, but we did have high hopes. We knew that this was something that can kick on and can kickstart, and we looked at
for me, I was just sorry to cut you in there. For me, the podcast was always going to be as successful as we wanted it to be, and I think that was always going to be in direct correlation or in direct relation to how optimistic we were about Chelsea Football Club as a team moving forward. And I think that 12 months ago, when we knew that at the time, you know, Tammy and Reece James and Tomori and Mason Mount and one or two of the others had matured another year, and we had brought in the experience of Silva, and, you know, there was the whole Kepa debate that I still feel like to this day that he was hung out to dry, and I think he's proved himself as a very strong-minded young man, if nothing else. But then, there was Havertz, there was Werner, there was obviously, you know, Pulisic that we was hoping was going to be like fitter, and Hudson-Odoi coming back from his injury and stuff. So we was very optimistic about both Chelsea as a football club and the podcast as well. But I don't think that we ever imagined that by May the 29th this year, the podcast or Chelsea Football Club would have got to where they got to.
No, and we do want to sort of start by talking about how the podcast evolved, even from an early stage, from September to October, whereby, and my good friend knows this, and some people that know me well know this, but I will actually say it to our listeners now. My original plan for this podcast wasn't to have guests on the show until at a certain stage whereby we was known to a small section.
We had a community.
A small section of Chelsea sort of contacts that would know, this podcast has been established by two off-limits Chelsea supporters. They're pretty good. I didn't realise how quick it would evolve, whereby from October, so we're talking a month, we would have the chairman of the Chelsea pitch owners as our first guest. Now that was quite a real...
Yeah, he was a really nice guy as well.
Chris Isaac. Mr. Chris Isaac, great guy. And the Chelsea pitch owners, again, this we're not getting paid for this plug, so this is free. But we would like to urge people, if you don't know much about the Chelsea pitch owners, type it in on Google or whatever search engine you have. And if you're a Chelsea fan, buy a share. It is for a good cause. I have one. My 10-month-old daughter has one now, and we're also going to try and get one for the podcast as well, which will be sorted out at a later date. But we are looking to do that. But that was great for us because then it
was very educational to so many Chelsea fans that I spoke to a few Chelsea fans. So, for example, one of the avid listeners of the podcast is Mr. Steve Boots, who kindly came on and gave a message on one of our other podcasts, a particular podcast
we'll talk about that in a minute.
To later, and he listened to me. Now he is an avid Chelsea fan. Goes home and away, been all over the country with me watching Chelsea and everything. And he listened to the show and he was like, "I didn't know that," and he learned things as well. And it was a very interesting. Mr. Chris Isaac was a very, very nice man, and he was very accommodating to our interview, and he gave his time very graciously. And he was very thankful as well for being invited onto the podcast as well. He took it with a certain amount of pride as well. And like Keith said there, get onto Google and see what the Chelsea Supporters Club, see what the Chelsea Pitch Owners Club is all about, and well, I think once you know what it's all about, you'll want to buy a share because it is great. But he was our first guest, and me and Keith were very nervous, and we were very nervous about the audio, and we planned it. It seemed like we planned it inside out. Now, so Keith would be at work, and I'd be phoning him at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'd be like, right, I've got half hour till my boss is in. Have you got half hour? And he'd be like, yeah. So we'd have half hour quick chat, and then my governor would come in. I'd be like, right, I'll ring you on my lunch, and I'd run off and do my work, and Keith would have to catch up on his work. And I'd message him at 12:15. I'd be like, right, are you free to talk? Yeah, right, good. I've got 40 minutes. And I'd be in the forklift trying to have an egg mayonnaise sandwich or something. Like, what we'll do is, and it was just, and I think after that one, we relaxed a lot, and it was like, all right, so we do it at this time. We kind of know what we're going to ask him, and blah, blah. And we relaxed after that one, but it was a fantastic interview. It came out better than I thought it ever could for our first go at it. We had no rehearsals. We had no second go at it. We just got him on Skype or Zoom, whatever it was, Skype at the time. We got him on Skype and away we went. And it felt really natural and it was really good. And like you say, the idea of the podcast was to establish a community and establish sort of like ongoing jokes and ongoing traditions and ongoing, we wanted to get intro music and outro music, and we wanted to do different bits and pieces. And all of a sudden we went from Chris Isaac to our second guest.
And not just any guest. This is a guy who many people have classed him as a legend.
It is one of them people that people have heard of.
He's one of the people that has heard of, people love listening to. And I remember very well the day that I got the email to say that he's willing to come on to the show. I told you, And
wow.
we were like kids at Christmas. We were absolutely ecstatic, excited.
We was like kids at the North Pole at Christmas. we was like kids that were at the North Pole, where Easter, Halloween, and Christmas and their birthday are all on the same day. It was absolutely insane. We are, of course, talking about the former captain of Chelsea, the first captain to lift the FA Cup trophy, the first captain to lift the FA Cup trophy for Chelsea, the first captain to lift a European trophy, i.e. the Cup Winners' Cup in 1971, a man who was revered up and down the country by strikers and defenders alike, made more appearances for Chelsea than any other player in history, a record of 792, played for us across 3 decades, gave up a career playing professional cricket, as we found out on the show.
We did.
Which was brand new news to his own grandson, who got in contact with the show to say that was brand new information to him. We are, of course, talking about the one and only Ron Chopper Harris. And now that, our second guest, Keith, was something that, now forgive us viewers, but I think you'll understand this. We thought that it was going to take 10 years to establish ourselves to get to the point that we could interview somebody of such stature, of such history and heritage to the club, that we was wondering that the numbers of these people that would be around and capable of doing it, through no fault of their own, just through, the time continuum that keeps on ticking. We was worried that we'd never get around to interviewing some of these legends. So in month number 3, interview guest number 2, podcast episode maybe number 12 or something along them lines.
You are correct. Episode 12.
Episode 12. I do have a bit of a memory for numbers. We had the great Ron Chopper Harris on the show, who, and for those of you that haven't listened to it, go and listen to it, because it's a fantastic episode. And Keith done some fantastic work with some of the audio in it, and there's some other episodes as well talking about, like, obviously there's some audio there from the Chelsea Leeds FA Cup final games and everything. And at the end of it always gives me chills at the end of the audio that you've got, which is, I believe, the radio commentary from the night. It was actually the BBC radio commentary from the night. But at the end, when the Chelsea players are going up to lift up the trophy, you can hear all the Chelsea fans singing, Chelsea, Chelsea, Chelsea. And it really, ever since I first used to watch that on VHS, the official history of Chelsea FC up to and including 1989, I used to watch that on VHS, and it always gave me goosebumps. And talking to the man that was there, that left his studs in half of the Leeds players' faces, and and obviously a year later lifted the Cup Winners' Cup against Real Madrid. Another time we played Real Madrid in a major semi or European final, and not been beaten, not gone behind even. Just another time. And it was just amazing. And yeah, he told us about playing football in the back garden with his dad and his brother. The fact that he was an Arsenal fan growing up and used to sit in the North Bank every single week, from reserves to youth games to the full team every Saturday, Wednesday, Thursday, Sunday, whatever it was. And then he gave up a career playing cricket for Middlesex to play for Chelsea. And the reason he played for Chelsea was because they offered £2 bob more a month and they paid his travel. And just interview guest number two. It was just, I'll be honest with you, Keith. I was a little bit worried that the podcast had hit such a high and we was just going to go downhill from there. I mean, it was always going to be difficult. You've done, obviously, our viewers know what an incredible job you've done since, and I know about all the guests that we're going to move on to and stuff now. But yeah, it was almost going to be impossible to top that. You've done a great job being able to, but.
Well, it gave us a platform to speak to people on the other side of the coin, because it's all very well having people on the podcast that were either there as spectators or, they might have even been the ball boys or whatever. But to get somebody of that caliber, as you say, someone like Ron Harris, there was no sort of end to where we could go from that. We was just, as you say, although we got a legend as our first player guest, then the wheels started turning a bit more about trying to get other people in, and we then had the idea.
It gave us a confidence, right? I think getting Chopper Harris on the show gave us confidence, thinking, well, if we can get the guy that's played more times for Chelsea than anybody else, who can we not get?
Yes, and we sort of discussed about people that we felt would be more realistic to get, people that we would like to get. And then we started to think about, with this podcast, maybe we can do one a month. And then that's how it happened. We still reviewed matches. We still had a bit of a laugh. And then fast forward on to further down the line, we got a player who won the Premier League with Chelsea, somebody who, again, divided opinion when he was at Chelsea, but sort of made his name at another club and is now partly established at another club, is Sean Wright-Phillips. Now, somebody who I did enjoy watching while he was at Chelsea, and I know he didn't play as many games as probably what he would have hoped, and he even did say that, and even fans would have hoped. But great interview, and it was nice to sort of have an insight into why he chose Chelsea over Arsenal, his conversations with Jose at the time, where this is the point.
I don't think anyone ever really needs an insight into why you would join Chelsea over Arsenal, but it was nice to hear the insight from a professional footballer. But I think we all know when they thought they were still good,
when Arsenal were winning matches.
That's what's really funny is back in 2008, Arsenal at least had this kind of logical delusion that they were still good. At least now watching them, they just know that they're shit. It's really funny. They used to get really annoyed that they lost when they thought they were good. Now they're annoyed before the match starts because they know they're shit. We could have beaten them 7-0 if we wanted to the other week. Sorry, Arsenal. You
can probably imagine my esteemed colleague had a good laugh when we beat Arsenal 2-0 at the Emirates earlier this season. But it was good, again, for the podcast to have somebody who people know, not just because he was a footballer, but because of who his dad is as well as, and what he has done outside of football. It was great. There was a few reservations on my part, as well as your part, in regards to certain things that was happening in the podcast at that point. We did straighten them out, which was okay. But I think we was more, again, looking to try and put the podcast in a direction that would suit both of us.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, myself and Keith both had a very clear end goal for the podcast. It's just that maybe we differed slightly on how we was going to achieve it, and we put our heads together, and instead of banging our heads together and spoiling what was an incredibly enjoyable thing, we obviously made the decision to allocate ourselves into sort of new roles and do what we could best for the podcast. And I believe that it's worked very well since. I mean, if you look at the success of the podcast, with obviously you being at the front of it and me joining you behind the scenes a little bit more, and doing what I can behind the scenes, it clearly works very well. And like you say, there was a transitional period for the Blue Day podcast, and it was a tricky period, and it was a tricky period to navigate, but we managed to work our way through it. And like you say, the Chopper Harris coming on the show, and then Sean Wright-Phillips, and like you say, we're going to go through all the people that you've had on the show and everything individually, and talk about their.
We are going to talk about them individually, yeah.
But there was a couple of names, and obviously like Chopper Harris, I could never get that name when I think of the names that we've had on our show. I can just never get like our mate Ron out of my head. Like, do you know what I mean? And a shout out as well to his daughter Claire, who's made a lot of it possible and arranged and scheduled a lot of it. A big shout out to Claire. She was an absolute superstar, and she was such a help. And it couldn't have happened without her. And a lot of the success is down to myself and Keith, of course it is, but a lot of it is owed to Ron and therefore Claire as well. So thank you very much for that. I'd like to reiterate our thanks to Claire for that as well. But there was one or two people when we was talking about last August, September, when we was talking about, you imagine in 5 years' time when we can get all these people on the show and everything. There was a few people that I in particular mentioned to you, and they was the likes of the mid-90s crew when I was talking about Paul Furlong and Mark Steen and John Spencer and Dimitri Karine, and, people that I grew up and that I really remember watching. My first game was in 1989. But I sort of remembering everybody's names sort of around 93, 94, Terry Phelan and Erling Johnson and, you know, people like that. And there's two people that you've had on the show that I am going to mention now, that you've had on the show from that era, big names from that area, important players from that era, two players in particular that I remember saying to you that these two players I would be so excited for. And that was one Gavin Peacock and one Kevin Hitchcock. Two fantastic, loyal servants to the club. Kevin Hitchcock at the club for over a decade, you know, was a loyal member of many a Chelsea club under many a Chelsea manager, never complained if he was on the bench. I never remember seeing anything bad about him in the press. His interview that he done with you was absolutely fantastic. He was really open and he made a good joke and made a good, you know, snap about being like a West Ham boy and the fact that he's an East Londoner and all the rest of it and blah, blah, blah. And him and Gavin Peacock telling, opening up about personal issues that he had in his life, and it was personal issues that contributed to him moving back down from the northeast, from Newcastle back down to Chelsea, and talking about his dad and his time now in Canada. Those interviews that you expect to see on Sky Sports. So there was kind of like two sides for it to me. One, they was really, really professional interviews that was fantastically well done, and I enjoyed listening to them, not because they was the Blue Day podcast, because they was really good interviews, but secondly, because these were two of my heroes growing up. These were two guys that I had posters of on the wall. You know, when people talk about, oh, when I was a kid, I had a Lamborghini Corniche on my wall, or Aventador, or whatever it is. You know, I had Gavin Peacock, Kevin Hitchcock, people like, do you know what I mean? I had people like that on my wall when I was growing up. So to feel connected in some way to something that they was doing that was so good was a real buzz for me. And just, again, I mean, I know the viewers got like really into it. I know like Gavin Peacock and his and Kevin Hitchcock's interview to listen to are probably my two favourite interviews, I have to say. The mid-90s lot is just, again, Chopper Harris, you can never take him off of his pedestal, because apart from possibly a Mason Mount, I can't imagine anybody getting within 200 matches of him these days. You know, the days of Terry and Lampard have gone. We know that now. So you can never take him off of the pedestal that he's on. And obviously, you know, we was about to move into that sort of period of time there, when the transition of me moving behind the scenes and you moving on and finding guests as podcasts for the show. And obviously, for the viewers that don't know, tell us what happened after I moved behind the scenes.
Well, I was going to say, before we do touch on that, there was one episode that we did do together. It was one of our last ones before you decided to go behind the scenes. And that was one that, for me, I was going in with a blank page because I had no idea where this was going to go. And this was something that meant a lot to you. And I remember specifically where I was when you asked me, can we do this?
Uh-huh.
I had no problem with it. I thought it was something that, as a Chelsea fan, it was my duty to do, because it would be a case of, we've got this platform, not a case of advertising it, but it was just more putting the name out there. And
that was a bone. That was making, a bonus.
Making people aware, making people aware of not just the fact he was a Chelsea fan, but the fact that this individual touched so many lives and had so many friends, and the family loved him and adored him. And we wanted to sort of do something out of respect. And we did that for Wurzel, somebody who you knew well. And that was a very deep episode. For those that are not aware, find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere. Find it on YouTube, for God's sake. But it was an episode where it took a lot out of me afterwards.
Mm.
I will freely admit it took a lot out of me afterwards, and it was a case of reflection. Looking at life in a different way, because we spoke to Wurzel O'Brien's family. We heard from his family with notes and comments that you were fantastic to get, and I still appreciate that to this day, that you was able to share that with myself and share it with the listeners. And when we was able to upload pictures of him on Instagram and sort of, highlight that we're talking about this guy, the feedback we got was huge.
Yeah.
And it is still one of our top listened shows on YouTube.
Yeah, it's one of our most viewed. Yeah,
and we've had some fantastic guests, but that episode still, for those of you who have listened to it, for those of you who knew him and liked our episode, thank you from the bottom of my heart, as well as my good friend here. One a case of we had fun doing it, but we enjoyed.
We did. We had fun doing it. We did have fun doing it because it was, it's fair to say that we had fun doing it, Keith. I know what you mean. It was fun to hear the memories. We got a lot of stories from his nephew, Jimmy, his daughters. We got messages from his sister, his nephew, Ryan. We got, obviously we had Steve Boots come onto the show.
That's right.
Actually give a message. We got a message through from his brothers, from his family in general, from his niece. We got messages from all over. We got messages from Chelsea fans. We got messages from just friends and people that barely, but we got messages after from people that barely even knew him. Oh yeah, I remember this one time when I was blah blah, and and it was a very difficult episode to do. It took a lot out of it. I don't think it was necessarily the episode itself that took a lot out of us. It's the fact that we took the time of taking a month to prepare it. We had essentially a script, and we had a schedule, and we had recordings, and we had all these notes that we wanted to read out. And like you said, it was for Carl Wurzel O'Brien. # justice for Carl. Carl's life was tragically taken from him at a very young age, not too many years ago, on the Roundshore estate. The perpetrators are still at large. Nobody's ever been convicted for the offence. Hence the # justice for Carl is still quite a big thing on the internet. You can find information on it. So we implore you to, look at the information on that, and they're still out there somewhere. So that was another part of the reason that we did the show, because we wanted to continue to raise the awareness as well for Cole and for the justice that his family so desperately and so deservedly seek. And I know that his family were extremely touched. I know that they listened to it, and we released it on the anniversary of his death, which was the 23rd of December. It was the 23rd.
I'm going back. It was the 23rd of December. Absolutely.
23rd of December. And I know that some of them listened to it on the 23rd. Some of them got together over Christmas time, whether it be the 24th, 25th, 26th. They got together over at Christmas, and they listened to it as a family together. And I'm very good friends with the O'Briens, and they said it was very weird listening to me and everything, but they were so pleased, and they were so humbled, and they were so gracious, and it was worth every second. Yeah, it took a lot out of me emotionally, and indeed probably like physically, because there was going to work leading up to Christmas, and then trying to squeeze in all these recordings and all these notes and messages and speaking to it. And it's not just a case of messaging someone going, "Oh, I'm doing a podcast for your uncle. Can you leave a nice note?" It's a case of, this is what we're doing. This is how we're going to handle it. Do we have permission? Can you say a few words? And it wasn't the simplest thing to do. It was very time consuming, but oh my God, worth it. And yeah, thank you very much to the podcast for giving me that platform to be able to do it. It was something that I'm very pleased and very proud to have done. I'm very proud of it. I think people should be proud of things that they do, probably a lot more than they are, but I am very proud of myself and you, and I'm very proud of the podcast for getting to a stage where we put so much work into it in such a short amount of time that we could present that on our platform and get it to thousands of people, So yeah, that was excellent. That was the personal highlight of the year for me. I mean, yeah, Chopper, and I'm sure Wurzel will understand when I say this, right? And Wurzel, I know you're up there cracking a laugh, right? But when Chopper came on the show, listen, mate, I tell you what, that's pushing it. I mean, like, I'm more saying it out of respect, I mean? You are, of course, my highlight of the year, and you will always be my highlight on the podcast. Nothing else would ever get close to you, Wurzel. But I tell you what, Chopper pushed you fucking close. And I think you understand. Well, Wurzel was a groundsman back in the 70s. He was very possibly a groundsman, and very possibly, probably went over the white line from when Chopper Harris had booted somebody off and taken the touchline out, I'm sure he put the corner flag back in after Chopper had put somebody's head through it. So, I'm sure he'd understand. But no, fantastic episode, and was very grateful to have done it.
And that was 2020, from September to Christmas. That was us. And then we looked at the podcast, we looked at our figures. We knew that there was not a huge following, but there was more of a cult following, that there was the regular people that were listening to us.
From different countries. We had a lot from America and Australia, and
I'm going to talk about what the countries that are listening to us sort of later, because I've got more of the numbers, because we have a few more countries that are now listening to us. So thank you massively for that. So we roll on 2021. You decide that you need to move on, take a step back from recorded, and we did actually do an episode on that. We did discuss in detail. We discussed in detail what we wanted to do. And
so it was the fact that obviously, as part of that interview, I discussed a lot about my detachment to Chelsea in recent years and how I've become very detached with the club and how it's not the club that I followed as a kid. And yes, they're hugely successful, but it wasn't quite. So I was detached from the club as well. So I didn't feel that I could that I don't do anything by 99%. I only do things at 100%. And I didn't feel that I could put in the emotion and therefore the dedication and the motivation required to keep the podcast to the impeccably high standards that it was, which is why I decided to take a step back and focus more on the behind the scenes and the social media. I've got a bit of a passion for social media. Even though I despise social media, I have a bit of a passion for controlled social media, and I watch a lot of social media, and I know quite a lot. It sounds silly, but I know quite a lot about it. I do quite a lot of research into it. As Keith knows, I spend many an hour researching how to optimize our channel on social media as much as I can. So I felt that I could put my 100% passion into that. And to be fair, the balance has worked really well, hasn't it, Keith?
yes, and it was something that we discussed off air, of course. We discussed it for many days. So we looked at it. We wanted to keep the format going whereby we would interview ex-players, and we did that. We had a great one with Kevin Wilson.
Yeah.
In January.
What a good guy. What a good guy Kevin Wilson is.
Fantastic striker.
That's the main thing that I took from that interview. Again, great interview. Fantastically well done. I know how nervous you were. One of your sort of earlier, was it your first interview by yourself or maybe your second? It was the second one. So it was early days. It was early days without, being in the hot seat by yourself and having all the pressure on yourself. But what I took from that interview was what a lovely guy Kevin Wilson is. What a lovely guy. We
sort of looked at that. We looked at the Kevin Wilson one, which was great. And it was somebody who doesn't get the recognition he actually deserves, to be fair,
Absolutely.
in the sort of the early stages at Chelsea, especially in the late 80s, early 90s.
Tough times to be a Chelsea player. Tough times to be a Chelsea player. We
then had somebody from Chelsea's academy that then was part of that era when Ruud Gullit was there, Glenn Hoddle was there, Vialli was in charge of Chelsea, and that was Mark Nichols.
Yeah.
Somebody who will always be remembered for his goals against Tottenham at White Hart Lane, the 6-1 win, should be noted. It was great.
Forgotten that. Will never be forgotten.
No, and it was great because we was able to establish a following whereby certain Chelsea supporters of a certain age that probably didn't know who Kevin Wilson was, might have known better who Mark Nichols was. So we was looking at it from a Chelsea perspective we're trying to get all fans in. So we weren't just looking more specifically at the newer fans. We weren't looking to try and get, with all due respect, the old codgers that probably podcasts are not the sort of thing. We tried to go for everybody. So then the 1st of March, 2021.
Hence why, sorry, Keith, there. I've never noticed the link there. So our first ex-player guest was Ron Chopper Harris.
Yes.
And our second ex-player guest was Sean Wright-Phillips.
Yes.
So you're talking about getting the old codger fans in and the new age fans in. So you had the captain from the first time we won the FA Cup, and the second guest you got on in his first season for Chelsea won the FA Cup. Nice little link there, talking about old and new fans. Can't do better than that.
I'll try my best.
Thinking that, Wright Phillips won the FA Cup in 2007 for Chelsea.
He did, but we signed in 2005, so his first season he did win the Premier League.
Okay, so his second season he won.
His second season. I get what you meant. It's been a long day. Yeah, it has been a long day. But then the podcast...
It's 6:15 in the morning. How long have you been away?
The podcast then evolved further, and after months of discussions, we was able to get 2 established Chelsea names as guest hosts for the podcast in Ron Harris and Gary Chivers. Great guys to have on the podcast, some fantastic stories. And the podcast did go to another level because the figures went up. People started to know more about us, and it was great. And then we even had a top journalist in his time, somebody who has written many books about Chelsea, in Harry Harris.
He still is a very good football journalist, is Harry Harris. The opinion you have of Harry Harris. As I sit here, ladies and gentlemen, you cannot see the video. I can see Keith's bookcase, and I can see at least about 8 Harry Harris books on there. So he is obviously a big fan of his. But that was a bit of a Jermaine Pickford moment for those of the viewers that remember that one. But it was a bit of a Jermaine Pickford.
I was waiting for you to bring that up on this reunion show. I can't believe it's nearly been over half an hour and you've brought it up.
Listen, I made my notes, which are as follows. Jermaine Pickford. That's the end of my notes. Oh, no, wait a minute. There is an extra. Chris Sutton is a wanker. There was 2 notes, technically, but we had covered the Chris Sutton bit already, so it was fine.
We was able to have Harry Harris on for 3 episodes talking about Chelsea and talking about certain stories that were occurring and certain things that were happening at Chelsea at the time, especially with Roman Abramovich turning up, the inside story of the issues between Ruud Gullit and Ken Bates, and then when Vialli took over. So all of that mixed in, plus the ex-player interviews, and then we had some fantastic guests within the space of a month. The likes of Alan Mays, Steve Wicks,
Alan Hudson,
Clive Wilson.
Alan Hudson.
I was going to talk about them in a minute, and then Paul Hughes. Again, somebody from Chelsea's academy.
What a great interview. That was a very insightful interview. Him and Mark Nichols obviously talking about that period of time where Chelsea was starting to become a really successful team. We had just come off the back. We was kind of in the middle of those seasons where we won the FA Cup and then the League Cup, then the Cup Winners' Cup, then the Super Cup. Then we won the FA Cup a year or 2 later again. And we got into the Champions League, and there were seasons that we was competing for the league. And I mean, a bit being around the club at that time with the likes of, across that period of sort of 4 or 5 years, from Zola and Di Matteo and Mark Hughes and Vialli and Frank Leboeuf, moving on to your Marcel Desailly's and your Idager Johnsons and your Jimmy Floyd Hasselbanks and your Jesper Gronkiers and your people like that. It was an amazing time to be a Chelsea player. And those interviews, for those of you that haven't listened to them, or even for those of you that have, go back and re-listen to them, because I think they're really worth a re-listen. But the Paul Hughes and Mark Nichols interviews were absolutely, I thought they was really insightful. Thought that, again, Keith, your questioning was excellent. Obviously, really opened the interview up, and well worth a listen, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that haven't caught it. It's on our YouTube channel, and like Keith said, there are
all episodes are on YouTube, and all episodes you can find.
There's links. Even if you're just on the Facebook, there'll be go back on the Blue Day podcast. There'll be a link for it.
And then, due to conflicting schedules and due to time constraints, obviously Ron Harris and Mr. Chivers were unable to carry on with the podcast, but we was able to get the great Steve Wicks. And I will say the great Steve Wicks because he is one of the nicest guys that I haven't met face to face yet, but my goodness, we have been speaking on.
And by one of, what he means is he's the second nicest person that he's never met face to face, because he's never met me face to face. That's why he said one of, not the.
I weren't going to say thee, of course not. I weren't going to say thee. But Steve Wicks came in whereby we did need a new co-host, and it was a case of I wanted to carry on with the review of Chelsea matches because I felt it was important to keep that. And thankfully, he was able to come in. Really nice guys, people that know him. It's been a pleasure to sort of speak to him about Chelsea. And again, Warren, the great thing is that he's a Chelsea fan. He's not one of the guys that say, "Oh, I did this. Oh, but I'm not really bothered." He cares about Chelsea. And really how he reacted with the Champions League final is something that I won't forget. Obviously, talking to him after the game, it was just unbelievable.
I do believe that. I do believe that one of the two of you, I won't say which, I do believe that one of the two of you had a couple of sherbets, haven't you?
Put it this way: this was an unbelievable experience, and I thank everyone that was part of the podcast and made the podcast what it is. The fact that when Chelsea won the Champions League, I got 2 ex-players calling me, little old me, after the game, going completely and utterly bananas that Chelsea won the Champions League. That don't happen every day.
As Chelsea fans, that does not happen to a Chelsea fan. That does not happen to you if you support a football team. That does not happen to you, right? That's just not something that happens to you. I mean, you think that night you had the most perfect night that you could ever imagine. Chelsea won with a clean sheet against an English team, against a team from Manchester in the Champions League final. The noisy neighbours from Manchester as well, which was particularly great. You had a phone call from 2 ex-Chelsea players, and you had a phone call from me. I mean,
even better.
I think I even video called you from the pub.
But also that month of May, not just the Champions League final, but the podcast. And this is something that I've always had in my mind for this podcast. I wanted it to be different from all the other podcasts that is out there, whether it's from England or even in the States. I wanted it to be different. So my idea for this podcast, as it was the 50th anniversary of Chelsea winning the Cup Winners' Cup against Madrid, I was looking to do a reunion show / interviews with some of the players of that great side of 1971 that Ron Harris was part of, and the likes of Derek Smedhurst, which many people might not remember, but please listen to that interview because my goodness, he's got some stories to tell. Alan Hudson, which I'll briefly talk about in a minute. John Dempsey, again, one of the nicest guys I speak to, but I've never met. Utter proper gentleman. When the name gentleman's in the dictionary, there is a picture of John Dempsey in the dictionary as well. He personifies the word gentleman. And John Boyle as well, that was part of that great team. You know well, Warren, it was very stressful. And there was many hours trying to get these guys for the interview, not just because of time constraints, not just because of laptop issues, but just to get them in the month of May talking about Chelsea from 50 years, half a freaking century ago. Mike, you name me another freaking podcast that can do that. I can't, but it was just unbelievable to hear the stories that people have told us about how great Chelsea was in that era, to hear the stories from them people that when you watch Chelsea on the big match on ITV4, for example, and you see these players playing, you're like, my God, these guys I've spoken to, but people can listen to and hear their stories.
Yeah.
Believe you me, May 2021, I hope there will be no other stressful month like that was. I hope.
Yeah, but what a way to finish it.
But that was fantastic. And I thank Alan Hudson, Derek Smedhurst, John Dempsey and John Boyle for their time on the show, for their interviews. And put it this way, if you see a Chelsea legend at Chelsea before you go to the ground, or you see them around the stadium, don't badger them and sort of, ask for their autograph. Just ask them, how are they?
Yeah.
Because they'll probably appreciate that as much as anything else. Don't sort of say, I want an autograph or a selfie or, sign my shirt. Just ask them how they are.
Yeah.
And then we had the summer, Warren, and you know me, I'm quite optimistic. I tried to be optimistic. My idea for June, July and August was to do a special look at players that Chelsea signed in the summer, whether it was the 90s, 80s or the noughties. And then that's when we had the likes of Gavin Peacock. What a guy to start that particular, schedule with.
Like I say, apart from the Great Chopper and apart from the podcast that we did for Wurzel, which was obviously completely different, in terms of ex-player interviews, put it this way, the ones that I haven't been involved in, Gavin and Kevin Hitchcock were my favourites, the Gavin Peacock.
And despite the fact that he has an autobiography out, Gavin Peacock, interview-wise, he doesn't do many. So it was great to have him on the podcast, albeit he was in Canada, lovely country, by the way. And it was great to sort of discuss Chelsea from a period where I was a fan of Chelsea. And I remembered certain stories where he told me about the 94 run, Glenn Hoddle, for example. It was great. And then we looked at the likes of John Sparrow, again, somebody from the 70s that was a Chelsea lad, came through the Chelsea youth system and played a lot of games for us in the old second division. Kevin Hitchcock. Now, for those of you that are not aware,
what a penalty saver.
A great penalty saver. But
I'll tell you what, right? I'll tell you what, Keith, to cut you off there, right? In the Super Cup, right? I would have brought on Kevin Hitchcock ahead of Kepa, I'm telling you. I would have had him straight on. I would have had him with Peter Cech's hat on.
For those that are perhaps not well known of how we set up here at the podcast, we try and contact as many people that we feel is realistic to get on the show, and for those that we feel have got a story to tell. We don't just randomly. We don't contact anybody. We
do it specifically. I mean, there's certain Chelsea players that we haven't necessarily contacted because even though we might find them interesting, we know that not necessarily a large demographic of Chelsea fans are going to find them it's not going to be an attractive interview to them. So we obviously, that's why we get on the likes of Gavin Peacock and Kevin Hitchcock and Chuck Barris.
Kevin Hitchcock, for example, somebody who was there from the 80s all the way up to the noughties because he was part of the FA Cup in 2000. He was behind the scenes at that point.
Yeah.
I contacted the club where he works with, which is New England Revolution in the MLS. No way did I ever think that they would get back to me within 24 hours to say, yeah, he'll do it. No problem. It was just crazy. And I remember contacting you when I got the email back and we were both shocked.
Yeah.
And again, you can sort of probably tell by the sound of the interview, you can tell from my voice. And I was in awe of the guy because of the fact that not only is he giving up his time, bearing in mind he wasn't at home, he was at the training ground finishing up.
Yeah.
And I had to speak to a few people as within the New England setup to make sure that he is able to do it. And obviously we was under a time limit. My God, for me, that was one of the top interviews that I've done.
Yeah.
Because of the fact he lives in the States, thousands of miles away. The fact that a professional football club, now, if any of those who are working for a professional football club that may actually think twice about this, bear it in mind, when somebody emails you, we do get emails back.
Yeah, generic ones.
Yes, but to get him on, brilliant. And then we sort of carried on. Darren Barnard, again, somebody who Chelsea signed, somebody who was part of the early stages of Chelsea in the 90s. He had a great story to tell, and I do urge people to listen to that. Chris Hutchins, people might know him as an assistant, who was also a very good coach in his own right in the Premier League. He had a great story to tell from Chelsea in the 80s. And then we move on to mid-July, Warren, and this is something that I was extremely proud of to have. And it had to be 2 parts, couldn't just be one because of the size of the interview. Spy.
Yeah. Now, somebody that, I mean, how long was he announcer at Chelsea for before he retired? 80 years? No,
80.
No, it was, what was it? 30 odd years, wasn't it?
Round 30, yeah, it was over 30.
About 30 years. Now when you think of the great days and great nights at Stamford Bridge, and you think of the wars against Barcelona and the 4-2 against Bayern Munich and the 3-1 against Vicenza and the 3-1 against Barca and the 8-0 against Wigan and the great FA Cup matches there down the years and Real Zaragoza in 95 and Millwall in 95 and, like all these great matches down the years. And you just think that he introduced every single one of those players, every single one of those teams, every single one of those men. Every time a manager, when Mark Hughes or Gianfranco Zola come back to Stamford Bridge, he was the man who said a big welcome back to Stamford Bridge to blah, blah, blah. And he was just the man. I mean, I remember the best story that I have of Neil Barnett as an announcer when I was actually there was me and Aaron, again, another avid listener of the Blue Day podcast. And it was 2005. And I think it was the second home game of the season. We'd beaten Wigan and Arsenal 1-0 and we had a midweek game against West Brom. And we was actually rested a few players. So I think Crespo was rested, Drogba was rested, SEM was rested, Paulo Ferreira was rested, Peter Cech was rested, one or two other players, maybe a Robin was rested and maybe I don't know who else was rested. Somebody else was rested, maybe a Carvalho or Terry or something. I don't know. He'd made about 8 or 9 changes, Mourinho had. So I rung up Aaron on the day. I lived in Milton Keynes at the time. Aaron was down in Croydon Way. So I rung him. We met up at Victoria, spent the day like having a few drinks, having something to eat or whatever. And that night he said, right, so in goal, number 23, Carlo Cudicini. Number 2, Glenn Johnson. This is his 21st birthday today. I remember that bit as well. And he said he went through the team. And then he came out with, it's a bit of a weak bench. Number 1, Petr Cech. And then it was like, Petr Cech, Ricardo Carvalho, Paulo Ferreira, Ian Robben, Michael Essien, Didier Drogba. Like, it was just this, like, Matthias Kesman, whoever it was, I don't know. It was just like the strongest bench that the Premier League had ever known. And then he done the West Brom team. And then just as they was about to kick off, he done and that was really funny. Me and Aaron were laughing at this point quite a lot. Everyone else was laughing at that. And then he said, and then at the intro to the game, he was like, ladies and gentlemen, it's your champions, the champions of England. It's Chelsea versus West Bromwich Albion. And it was just absolutely hilarious. And that was one of the first times that I really recognised that it was always the same person that was doing it. It was kind of, it had never really clicked. I'd been to hundreds of matches before that point, and like obviously most of them at Stamford Bridge. And throughout all of my years going in the 90s, he would have been the announcer, and he would have done all the, he would have announced John Terry's signing of the contract on the signing of the pitch at half time when John Terry's dad didn't go out on the pitch because he had the ump because he wanted him to sign for Man United, and all that. And he would have been there pitch side for all the different players that had signed and come back over the years and the fans. And he would have just experienced it all from ground level throughout his whole career. And there's probably nobody better, because you could interview a Jose Mourinho, you could interview a Ken Bates, you could interview a Roman Abramovich, you could interview a John Terry, you could interview any of them, and not one of them would have seen as much as that man over the years, because he would have seen it all. So yeah, what a coup for the podcast. Something that, again, you talk about getting the likes of Chopper Harris, getting someone the likes of Neil the Spy Barnett. It's that kind of level. It's that level for a different reason, but it's that kind of level. His knowledge and his intimacy of the club, and like you were saying earlier, a Chelsea fan. Like, do you know what I mean? Somebody that it's just in his blood, it's in his DNA. They say you cut us. It's the Chelsea disease, isn't it? It's the Chelsea love. It's a very unique thing amongst Southern club. They often say, and you know what? It sounds funny, but they actually say this on the football game FIFA. Other football games are available, but they say this on the football game FIFA. For many years, the commentators would actually comment on the fact that Chelsea fans were the only fans from the south that were known to have the passion of the teams of the north. I mean, when you consider all the noisiest stadiums in the country, you think about Stoke and Liverpool and St James's Park and Sunderland. They're all in the north of England, basically. And it's that kind of love that he has. And that's why he's so connected to this. It's part of the reason someone like Joe Cole is so connected to the club. Somebody that wasn't with us for that long of a time, really. There's probably not many people that only spent sort of 7 or 8 years with us. Oh, he's a long time, but he spent 7 or 8 years with us, and it was like he only ever played for Chelsea. He's just a proper Chelsea fan, and that was the same with Neil Barnett. He was just a proper Chelsea man and a proper gentleman. And like you say, he had so much to talk about it. He got split into 2 interviews. And the only reason he got split into 2 interviews is because he was running out of days of the week to record it. So, and that wasn't because he rabbited on like I do. That was just because he had so much to say. And it was very, very, again, that's another. I mean, obviously, I'm going to say you should listen to all our podcasts. What else am I going to say? Oh, yeah, that one was shit. Don't listen to that. Obviously, I'm going to say they're all brilliant. But there are probably 10 in particular out of the 100 or so that are on there, including all the watching on the hundreds of videos that are on there that we've uploaded and classic highlights over the years and different bits and pieces that you've done with Chopper and Chivs and all the other interviews and the reviews that we've done and the Wurzel and this reunion show of everything we've done. There's probably 10 that if somebody was sat in my house and they said, what's your podcast about? I'd say, watch these 10 episodes.
Yeah.
And they're the ones that we've mentioned.
That would be one of,
the Peacock, the Hitchcock, the Harry Harris, the Neil Barnett, the Chopper Harris, probably 1 or 2 of the other 70s interviews as well, the Sean Wright Phillips, the couple of Academy ones. And then obviously like the Pitch Owners one was good. And like, you know, some of our reviews are really good as well. If you listen to our reviews from last September, October, and then put into, you know, that we had theories back then, they've been put into practice since then, and the realities have come true. You can see me and Keith often discuss, and by me and Keith often discuss, I often mean that I'll message him and say, oh, go to this second of the podcast and he'll listen to it. And I'll be like, see, look, I was right when I called that, didn't I? I knew I was right.
You've done that a few times. You have done that a few times.
A few dozen, expect a few more as well. It was like when the great Chopper Harris come on the show and he agreed with me about Kepa, about the fact that he'd been hung out to dry and he was actually a very good goalkeeper. And Chelsea, and I'm very pleased that Chelsea fans got behind him. And when he saved them penalties, he rebuilt his bridges. And I have to admire the man a lot for that. I mean,
I do agree with that.
We haven't discussed massively the players. We all know what's gone on at Chelsea Football Club. We all know that we run the Champions League. We all know that we've signed Lukaku. We all know that certain players have left and we're disappointed about that. Me and Keith have kind of almost deliberately like left that out of the podcast because we kind of know what's going on with that in a minute. But Kepa is one of the huge success stories of the last 12 months at Chelsea for me. And I think it says it all that Tuchel hasn't gone out and bought another goalkeeper. No,
I mean we bought Bettinelli, but we
need a third choice.
With big clubs now, you buy 3 goalkeepers. You buy 3 goals. So we had Neil Barnett on, and again, please listen to it. It's great. He tells some great stories about the day when Roman bought the club, the day that Zola was leaving.
When he flew over Tottenham and decided to when he flew over Chelsea on the way to Tottenham and decided to buy us instead.
Warren, the ex-players kept coming, you know, the likes of Kenny Swain.
I just forgot. It got to the point that you was ringing me up and you was like, I've just interviewed Steve Wicks. And I was like, oh, is he one of the people coming on? Jeez, did I get an email about that? It was getting to a point where we was getting a lot of content on, a lot of, because it was all in demand. It was getting to a stage where we've got people from all over the world now listening to us, you know, and again, people from Jamaica, Greece, Colombia, for crying out loud, Ireland, Sweden, fantastic. America, Australia, Norway, Denmark, Sweden.
So we've had the likes of Kenny Swain, Tony DeRigo as well, which was quite a recent one. That came out on the 14th of August. Fantastic gentleman. I know that his allegiances is partly with Leeds United, which is fair enough, but he's got a good story to tell with Chelsea.
That's not a Chelsea ringtone.
That's not a Chelsea ringtone at all. No, God knows who that is. I will find out later. You don't normally hear that on the player interviews. And then very recent, and I'll sort of leave it with in regards to the player interviews because we've sort of discussed them. By the time you listen to this, which this is coming out on the 8th of September, we've had 2 great interviews that have come out within the space of a week. Jakob Kjellberg came out on Sunday, and the iconic Pat Nevin came out. His episode came out on Monday, and
Yeah,
somebody
Pat Nevin,
who
the Chelsea TV and TalkSport hero, like, do you know
again,
what I mean?
he has a autobiography that I urge people to buy. If you can, I think there are some at Chelsea Megastore that are signed by him, so feel free to purchase a book. But getting people like that, I'm not just sort of saying this, just to sort of blow my own trumpet. No way this time last year that I ever thought I would get them established names of football on a podcast.
No.
Near enough my podcast. Bearing in mind, Jakob lives in France, and half the time he spends filming. Pat Nevin is always busy with Chelsea TV and does his bits for Chelsea FC match days and even with BBC. But other fantastic guests that we've had, and I'm very lucky, and I will say this, I'm very, very lucky to have spoken to every single one of them, and I thank every single one of them for being part of the podcast. Some I've forged good friendships with, others mere acquaintances, which is fair enough. But I'm looking forward to the next 12 months. And this podcast has got big plans for the next 12 months. Huge plans for the next 12 months. You're looking at me thinking, I don't know what he's on about.
Well, I'm looking at you wondering if you're going to tell everyone.
I thought you know. Well, for those of you, I did mention it briefly, but all I'm going to say in regards to content, in regards to who we're looking to possibly bring onto the podcast, there's 3 years that next year is going to be very, very significant for Chelsea Football Club. So, Warren, I'm going to say the years to you. Don't say anything else. And then we shall leave it as that. Okay? 1992.
Yes.
1997.
Yes.
2012.
Yes.
That's for next year.
I think I can demise from that. What?
That's for next year. For those that like listening to the shows, thank you. Between now and December, there's some names that I'm speaking to at the moment, trying to sort of get a feel for their interest, but also not just that, but obviously, again, a lot of them, they're not just sitting at home watching Emmerdale Omnibus or whatever. These are working guys that are working. So it is very, very difficult to get the time in, but we are looking to maintain the high standards that we've not just set, but we've broke time and time and time again.
Oh, we're looking to push on and even set the bar even higher.
Well,
let's get a couple of world footballers of the year on. That'd be good.
You never know. We shall see. But we are looking to do a little bit more with the podcast between now and next year. And one of the other reasons why my good friend here wanted to come on the show, not just to sort of talk about old memories within the last 12 months. You actually have some news, don't you?
Yeah, well, something that I've been thinking about because obviously one of the reasons I went behind the scenes was obviously because of some of the creative difficulties that we had when it came to the actual podcast. I mean, there were certain other things that I wanted to talk about, but I was obviously not restricted whatsoever because I could talk about Chelsea all day long, but I obviously wanted to maybe talk about other things and other sports and other events and things like that. So the reason I took a step back was because I was going to take a step back and sort of hopefully help with the PR and social media behind the scenes on the Blue Day podcast to see how viable it would be for me to start what I want to start on the side in sort of not in conjunction, but kind of as a sister podcast, if you will, to the Blue Day podcast, which is going to be quite simply the weekly sports podcast. Now, what I'm hoping that will consist of, it's going to take me, like I say, I've been trying to put it together for a little while now. I'm under no rush or pressure to sort of get it out there because I want to try and get it right. But what it's going to consist of is, like I say, it's going to be a weekly sports podcast. It's going to cover a huge variety of things. So, for example, one week I may do a live watch along for the NFL draft. The next week, I might talk about a sporting legend from a sport. I'll put up polls. It'll be completely interactive. There'll be live phone-ins. There'll be, you'll be able to message me and give me your opinions and your thoughts, and I'll be able to give them out and everything. One of the first ones that I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be getting somebody on the show who is a part-time bodybuilder, and we're going to be talking about bodybuilding, and we're going to be talking about different things like that. And unlike the podcast, it's going to be a little bit more obviously on the podcast we wanted to keep it strictly football, i.e. so we kept politics out of it and everything, but when I'm discussing with this guy about bodybuilding and stuff, we are going to discuss sort of like body image issues, and like that kind of thing is going to come into it, because it's a very real part of his world. Even though he's only a part-time bodybuilder, he's still part of that world, and he sees it a lot and stuff like that. But then other weeks we're going to be talking about basketball and tennis and Formula One, and I've got quite a vast knowledge on quite a lot of sports. I'm very passionate about a lot of sports, and there's going to be watch-alongs for different sports, and I do online league sim racing for Formula One, and I take that quite seriously. That's always streamed and everything, so there's going to be links in there for things like that for people to get involved if people want to come online and race me, and there's going to be a lot going on that's going to cover a whole broad spectrum of things, and it's going to be catered to the audience. So if one week the audience is like, well, the US Open in the tennis is on at the minute, and Evans from Great Britain is in the fourth round today, we want to cover a bit of that, then, I might do a watch along about that, and we can talk about tennis, and we can talk about days gone by and where future's going, and we can talk about different political differences that are in tennis. I know there's a lot of politics that go on with equal pay, and I know that there's a lot of politics that go on with certain players being told that they have to talk to the media after matches, and they say they don't want to because it causes them mental health issues. We're going to address things like that. We're going to not address things like that like we can actually do anything about it, but we're going to talk about it, and we're going to be open about it and stuff like that. So it's going to be a very, very open thing, all to do with sports. Anything to do with sports, we're going to cover it. If you want it covered, you message us and we'll cover it. Like I said, it's going to have a separate email. It's going to be uploaded onto the Blue Day podcast channel for now, so that we can twin them up and hopefully work together to bring an audience together, so that we can all have a bigger audience. And then maybe in one day in the future we'll branch off and get a sister channel on YouTube and maybe dedicate a little bit more time to that. But that's basically what I'm going to be doing. I'm hoping to get it up and running between now and I would say the end of October. I'm aiming for the end of October to be my first episode, like edited and released and available on YouTube and everything. There'll be social media pages for it that will be set up in the meantime and stuff like that. But it's just to run alongside the podcast really, and hopefully I can take some viewers across from the podcast and they can join in with mine, and hopefully a lot more people from the weekly sports podcast. Hopefully there's going to be football fans in there that are then going to listen to the podcast, and then we might get some interesting debates going on YouTube as well from fellow supporters, because that's what we want. We'd love for some Arsenal fans to come in and start talking, but Man United fans and team fans from around the world, we'd like to interact with as many people as possible, and let us know the content that you want us to provide to you as much as anything, especially for the weekly sports podcast, because obviously it's so much more open. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at with that. I mean, obviously there'll be more announcements in the coming weeks, especially coming up to like the first release date. But like I say, I'm pushing for the end of October. I want everything to be right. But there's going to be lots of things. We're going to do bios on like great characters. Like I've got what I'm going to try and do once a month is do a bio on, for like 10 months, I'm going to do my top 10 all-time favourite British sports people, from the likes of Lewis Hamilton to Andy Murray to Bobby Charlton to David Beckham to people like that, whoever. And I want to get the viewers' opinions on that and what their top 10s would be, what they think of mine and stuff like that. So I'm going to start doing things like that as well. So there's going to be an awful lot going on, in addition to the dozens of guests that Keith gets on the podcast and his reviews and his ongoing score predictors and his ongoing raffles and giveaways and whatever else he's doing at the minute. He'll probably be rapping in
too much
exactly. So there is an awful lot going on, and like I say, all this has been achieved in 12 months due to an extraordinarily large amount of hard work, and a massive amount of that has been done by Keith. It was his idea to create the podcast. He created it, and he brought me on board, and he's brought everybody else on board since. And Congratulations, Keith. Thank you very much for bringing me so much enjoyment over the last 12 months, and indeed for giving me my own platform now to move forward, and hopefully we can work together and be as successful together as we have been up till now. I mean, I've really enjoyed the ride. I mean, if all else fails, Keith, I know that I'm going to enjoy it. So
Exactly. And it has been great for this podcast to speak to some extraordinary people. And it's not just a case of we wanted to be like Arsenal Fan TV. No, absolutely not. We wanted to be different. We wanted it to be more serious.
Well, no, I know I was going to say I'm historically positive. I'm the most annoyingly, frustratingly, stubbornly want to tear my face off of, you want to tear the skin off of my skull on my face because I'm so positive. And then you have Arsenal Fan TV. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't disagree with a lot of what they say, because I watched a little bit of Arsenal Fan TV recently. I was feeling a little bit down, to be honest with you. So I thought I'd put on a bit of Arsenal TV. It was during the Brentford game. And I watched for about 3 minutes. And I mean, you know, I'll sum up in about 10 seconds all of the analysis that the Arsenal Fan TV offered whilst watching the Brentford Arsenal game. What a load of fucking shit! You're not worth the fucking money! You're useless! Get out of my club! What are you even doing here? I can't believe you've got an Arsenal shirt! And I must say, they're actually very, very insightful and completely correct. I mean, they might be shouting and swearing about it, but I find it very, very difficult to disagree with them, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't know about you, Keith, but I think they're absolutely spot on. I actually think they should be pundits because they get it absolutely spot on. Shearer and Wrighty haven't got a clue compared to these lot, because they get it right every single time. We're shit, we're going to lose, and they do every week. So I honestly think that they're part of like some betting scandal, because they always get it right. We're shit, we're going to lose, and they're shit and they lose.
All I will say on the matter is this. Arsenal Fan TV is the gift that keeps on giving. Absolutely.
To be fair, the gift that gives on giving is Tottenham, but that would take another whole podcast.
That's going to take a whole day to talk about. But listen, we could go on for hours talking about what we've done and everything else, but the proof is in the pudding. Find us on YouTube. Find us on Instagram. We have an Instagram account, so find us on Instagram. Find us on Facebook, facebook.com/The Blue Day Podcast. Find us on Twitter as well. We've got some good things up on there at this moment in time.
I was just going to cut in there, Keith. Sorry. I was just going to say, with regards to the YouTube, what would help us out an awful lot is me and Keith have been doing a lot of research into the YouTube. And what we've noticed is that a lot of features for YouTube, for example, going live from your mobile phone is not something that you can achieve until you have a certain amount of views and a certain amount of subscribers and a certain amount of time on YouTube and all the rest of it. Now, what would help us a great deal, and you'll notice a lot of people on YouTube say this, they say, give me a like and a subscribe. Now, some people think that that's to do with money. Some people think that that's just not important. Some people think they do it because it's like they do it for the numbers and the glamour or the prestige of it or something. It's not. There's a lot of features on YouTube that we cannot access at the minute. A lot of premium features that we cannot access that would actually enhance our ability to bring you better podcasts and better shows with better editing and better music and better thumbnails and better clips and better highlights, and everything could just be better. So please, when you get onto the YouTube, hit that like and subscribe button, hit that notification bell, follow us on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, follow us on Twitter, the Blue Day Podcast. It does help us out massively, but what it helps us do is make the show even better. It gives us more opportunities and it opens more avenues. I'm sorry for the advertising plug. It is something that we try not to do too much on the podcast because we don't want to be one of those shows. And sorry to cut Keith out of his outro there. I know that he'd been working for 6 months on his outro, so bless him. But I just thought I'd say, there you go then. I've done him a favour anyway. But no, honestly, ladies and gentlemen, the viewers out there, give us a like and subscribe. It really does help us massively, and I promise that you'll see the benefit of that, because when we reach a certain point on YouTube and we can become a YouTube partner, we can enhance everything that we do, especially on the YouTube. And we know that the YouTube is a big part of our advertising tool and a big part of how we reach a lot of our viewers. So, help us out and give us a like and subscribe. But Keith, back to your 6-month rehearsed outro.
It's going to take 6 months to bloody do it. One final thing before I do go. Thank you to Stevie. For those of you that were wondering about our images that we put up on YouTube and I put up on Instagram, thank you to Stevie. He knows who he is because of his name. For those of you that know him, tell him thank you from us as well. He is a valued member of this Blue Day podcast.
Yes, big
great guy who does the
very much
images. Really appreciate his hard work. Nice guy to boot. But that's it. That's our reunion show finished. And happy birthday, Warren.
Well, happy birthday to the Blue Day. The Blue Day
podcast.
The
Porky Pig has turned up. Fantastic. Chris Sutton's punched my esteemed colleague and Porky Pig's turned up.
Why do you have to lower the tone with Chris Sutton? Why do you have to lower it? Why couldn't you?
Because I didn't want to say Andy Townsend and Gustavo Poyet as well.
Why couldn't you have said somebody nice like Genghis Khan or something? Jesus.
Well, if I say Jermaine Penis, would that make you feel better?
Jermaine Pickford would.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening to the Blue Day podcast. We will be back with our regular previews and reviews coming up. We've obviously got fantastic and big games coming up in the month of September. So stay tuned to find out more from the Blue Day podcast. Keep the blue flag flying high. I've been Keith Lawrence. Stay safe and carefree.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.